Well, I debated whether I should give you the sermon first or just talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk much, but a little bit about our trip, but also update you on a few things happening here. One thing that I wanted to say, Charles and I were just talking before the service, and this is sort of a save the date, save the first Saturday in June on your calendar, because we're going to be doing a Broadway night, sort of a Broadway fundraiser. And if you like music and food, then just save the date, because we're going to do that. And that's part of a broader work of just how music and the music of the church can create community and bring people together. Now, before I left, I'm going to just go in order, I think. That'll be the easiest thing, otherwise I'll forget what I'm saying, But before I left, I sent you a video, and I told you about some of the people we'd been helping in the community. And I wanted to update you because while we were in Japan, two of the things that we had been working on turned out differently than I thought they were. So I told you before we left that there was a mom at Victoria Elementary that we were going to buy a car for. And everything, we literally left the check. We went up to the school, we gave the check, we said, now the only thing left will be just take the car to our mechanic and get it checked out. And then once he checks it out, take the check and they go, oh, everything's perfect. So I was in the airport in Tokyo and I got a phone call from the mechanic. And he goes, I hope I'm not bothering you. And I go, I'm in Japan right now. And he goes, oh, I think I'm bothering you. I said, no, luckily it's the morning and you're the afternoon. He says, you shouldn't buy this car. He said, it's not worth the money that... So we didn't. And so we're actually starting that again. The reason I'm telling you this is it's very important to know that we're not sloppy in our work. So we're not just going, well, we're just going to do this and go on. We got to a point, and so then we called the school and said, well, we're not going to buy it because this isn't the right thing. We actually want to improve this mom's life. And so while we were gone, we had two people looking, and I think we may have found one. But again, it has to be checked to make sure that it's worth the investment we're making to actually improve the community. Now, you remember the second thing we were working on was this 84-year-old woman who'd been homeless. And we put her up in a hotel. And I told her, I said, I'll put you up in this hotel until the end of March. And then I'll call two social workers we work with, and we'll see if they can help you. And they called while I was in Japan too. See, this is the problem with having your cell phone, is people can still reach out to you when you're far away. And they said, we've worked and we've tried, but, and I will say this, they didn't say that, there seems to be a cognitive gap here of being willing to take on the extra services that we're trying to provide. And so she called me. I talked to her while I was in Japan too. And I said, well, the whole point of getting you this was to create space so that you could receive these services. And I said, I think if you're not willing to take what they're giving you, I go, we can't just keep putting you up in a hotel. And so I said, what I'll do is if you're not willing to it's not even a question of willingness more, if you're not able to take what they're offering, then I'll come find you. And even if you're on the street, I'll come find you when I'm back. But we'll stay in relationship with you. And I don't regret putting you in this hotel because we tried very hard and we had two very good people working while we were gone. And so it's a reminder too that these things that we're working on don't necessarily work out the first time or don't work out the way we want, but it doesn't mean we don't stop. And we don't stop relating and we don't stop supporting. And we may have to relate to people in a different way as we accompany them with the same goal. I told her, I go, I'm not giving up on you. It just means we're going to have to try and do this a different way. And it's the same thing with that mom and that car. In fact, I see one of the people who was at Robin's 10th anniversary last night. Robin comes to the church. And if you know how hard she's worked to create opportunities for young people in our community who have fallen through the cracks, and how much has happened to create ways for them to reach their full potential. And so it's just so important that the primary calling of the church and the primary working of the church in our service, you see the different partners and people where you just have to keep attacking, keep working. And in fact, this 84-year-old woman told me, she goes, oh my gosh, she said, you're like a bumblebee. She goes, you're everywhere, just buzzing around. And I go, yeah, that's an accurate description. And in many ways, it is an accurate description. We just sort of carry the pollen. If bumblebees carry pollen, I know other bees, I don't know that much about bees. But we just carry the pollen and God does the growing. God does the life-giving. God just asks us to be faithful and to walk in these steps. I wanted to share those with you because, I left the country triumphantly, going, this is what we're doing and it's happening, but it didn't turn out the way we wanted. But it doesn't mean we're going to stop working, and I'm sure God has something for us as we continue in that work. Now, we did have a very good trip to Japan, and it's important for you to realize too, and I see I'm surprised some of you, even Jean who read today, I don't know, there's still a fog that we're living in, but I wanted to share why it's been important that we've had this relationship growing, because every time now we're seeing the true mission of the work. And it's called Akune Mission, so you're really part of that. And we've talked about how Akune Mission can renew churches in Japan. But this trip was the first time that we've asked ourselves, how can the Akune Mission renew churches in the United States? There are Lutheran churches in the United States that are struggling just as much as the churches in Japan. And what they're doing over there is figuring out how they can take their strengths and take their beauty and their charm and their service and renew. And I think God's going to ask us to do the same thing here. And so you may find that there's a new task for us, which is the work of renewal, not just of churches in Japan, but in the United States. So I wanted to just share very briefly 3 emphases of the mission, and then I wanted to share the 3 cities that we're working in. And it doesn't contain everything, but it gives you a sense. And if you come to the Soup Supper on Wednesday, I'll do a more comprehensive presentation, because I realize that being gone has blown up Lent. Lent is totally blown up. I hope you're still repenting, because you should be repenting still. But we're going to meet and have Soup Supper, and then I'll share it in more detail, and I'll even bring some pictures and so on. Because there's some interesting stuff that happened. But the 3 emphases are renewing through culture, through art, like going and bringing an organ concert, or going and bringing musicians to a place and gathering people together, gathering people in churches that maybe had 1 or 2 people left in them. There was one church, they recently did a concert, and a church that had 2 or 3 people in it had 130 people in it, because they were gathering people and using the power of art and culture. That's part of what Charles does with the choir, and with even talking about the Broadway Music Night, how it is that music can gather and grow. So that's one, renewal through culture. Another is renewal through education, and that has 2 parts to it. One is educating people about the history of Christianity in Japan, because it is a beautiful and tragic and painful and interesting history, which includes the American church being very active in Japan at the end of the 1800s up till now, but needing to have that connection renewed. That's one reason God is calling us there, is to renew something that had been going on for over 130 years from the United States. Now, that education includes the school we work with that is a Lutheran school, but many of the Christians who teach at that school have retired or aged out. And so how do we reintroduce or reconnect the faith to that school? And one way is through this youth exchange. Like maybe you're one of the people who has volunteered to do a homestay in July. Well, one of the kids that we met last year, who was with one of my kids, I reached out and said, hey, tell her we're going to be at the church. She can come and meet us. She did. She went across the city to meet us. And then afterwards, she started asking questions about Christianity. And she sent me a message. She said, what are your 3 favorite Bible verses? And I said, I'm going to have to come up with 3 favorite Bible. So I sent her 3 verses, and she said, oh my gosh, she said, I don't understand a word that you're saying. And it wasn't the English that was the problem. It was just like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And so we're doing this work of catechesis and this work of communicating the gospel with the idea that we want to see Christianity sort of reintroduced to the student body as well, so that when they come here, that students will understand visiting Huntington Beach isn't just coming to the beach and surfing and going to Disneyland, it's also experiencing Christianity. So we're wanting to see education renew in the school. And there's an openness to it, and the retired administrator, who is Christian, was very open to it as well. And so that can be a matter of your prayers. This young student's name is Kokoha, which means heart-shaped leaf, I think. Is that, Jean, you know the most Japanese of anyone, I don't know. If you want to hear a funny story, we were having lunch one day, and my wife's having this Japanese soup called zenzai. She goes, oh, sensai. And the Japanese guy goes, no, that means ex-husband, he said. She said, what? And he goes, and then gosai means second wife. She goes, I only know 8 words in Japanese, and now one of them's ex-husband and one of them's second wife. She goes, I'm never going to be able to use this conversationally at the 7-Eleven. So one is renewal through art, one is renewal through education, and then one is renewal through service. And the other aspect of education is this house for supporting this new school in Kyoto. But the service is going to places of earthquake, places of tsunami, places of natural disaster, and serving, and taking care of those who are serving. And this is a Lutheran Buddhist partnership. It's very unusual. I don't know of any Lutheran Buddhist partnerships, but this is the one that we're working with. And so it's a genuine mission, and I hope you realize that you have an important part of it, and we're going to be thinking how we do the mission work here in the United States, because the church needs to be renewed here too, and we need to see the power of the gospel here. So if you come Wednesday night, soup supper, we'll share a little bit more about it. And then next Sunday, for Palm Sunday, if you have palms, usually around this time of year, we ask you to save your palms, tell the gardener, save a cup. We don't need that many, but bring them by the church and then we'll cut them. We have the freshest palms in the United States because they're fresh cut by the people in our church. And I know some of you have been packing Easter eggs for Easter morning, so if you've been helping Michelle with Easter eggs, please bring those in the next week or so, because we're going to have a really big Easter egg hunt, and there's going to be a petting zoo, and we're going to do our breakfast, and Easter is going to be a wonderful time as well. One of the things we found out when we were in Nagasaki is there's a statue of Jesus where the head of Jesus was blown off by the atomic bomb, because the atomic bomb blew up right over the most Christian part of Nagasaki, over the cathedral. And I don't want to call it a rumor, but there's a book that was shared with us that an American soldier took the head of Jesus, because people take war trophies and different things, and he brought it back to Huntington Beach. And we said, Huntington Beach, you can't mean where we live. He goes, no, I think where you live. He said, I think it's still there. He said, see if you can find it. So I reached out to some of our American Legion guys and some people and just said, and I'll share some pictures, because I asked the Japanese guy for some pictures, which I'll share. And if any of you have seen a big head of Jesus in someone's backyard or on their mantle, that could be from the cathedral in Nagasaki, and we think it might be here. The person that they say has it, his name is John Roberts, John E. Roberts. And we were texting someone we know that has that last name, and she goes, why are you texting me from Japan? And I said, well, you're the only person I know that has Roberts in Huntington Beach. Was your father, did he serve in World War II? Yes, but his name wasn't John, that's his son's name. I go, oh, that's even better, because it's probably the next generation by this point. But we're going to be looking for this head of Jesus, because the rumor was that they wanted to return it, but it's a little unwieldy. And we might be part of that if we find it, and B, it would be really cool if we could return it to the cathedral, because the headless statue of Jesus they still have. And they would love to have his head back, which is sort of a strange thing to say. So, but wouldn't that be, that would be so unusual if that was part of the fruit of this mission, as the head of Jesus gets returned to the cathedral. So I think those are all the announcements. I did actually prepare a brief sermon for you, because I knew I was going to be sharing all these details to sort of catch us up. But you'll notice that this week we didn't read from the Gospel of Luke that we've been reading from. We read from the Gospel of John. And this scene of Jesus having dinner in Bethany is a wild scene, because Lazarus, who had just been dead, like if you had known Lazarus a week before, he was sick unto death, he dies, he's been in a tomb, and now he's having dinner. People must have been asking him 100 questions, and the room must have smelled amazing. Not of death, but of all, of all the spices and everything on his body. That doesn't just wash right off, all the oil and spices, so that room must have smelled incredible because of Lazarus. But Lazarus isn't really the focus. Lazarus is just sort of a blossom on the tree, because Jesus, within a week, will be crucified. So it says 6 days before the Passover, and in the Gospel of John, the Passover is the time of the crucifixion. So Jesus is coming to that moment, which is the end of his life. He keeps telling people, the hour is not here, my hour has not come. Well, now the hour is coming, because he came freely to take on the cross for our sake. This is what's so important to understand. Jesus didn't just come on a tour of mercy to go, well, this is interesting, being a human being and finding out what it's like to be you. Jesus came to freely take the cross. And it's not an easy task. This is why even in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asks the Father not to give it to him. But he always has the chance or the choice to reject it, and he doesn't. And the reason it's important to realize that his hour is coming is all the people at that dinner were so easily distracted. You can think of all the things they might have been thinking about. Thinking about, wow, I can't believe Lazarus is here. Especially if he owed you money and he's back, and you go like, well, Lazarus, I didn't think I was going to get that, but now that you're back, you still owe me $20. People who may have been distracted by just the concerns of home. Maybe they were ordering new furniture, or something had happened. People concerned with the politics of Judea and Rome, because all the time these pilgrimage festivals were rife with the potential for violence and sort of a powder keg of potential explosiveness in the politics. But in the midst of that, they're missing the potential of seeing that God's saving work is right before their face. And that's one thing that as a Christian I want you to really think about, is in a world filled with genuine concern, genuine anxiety, sometimes being distracted by small things or big things, God's saving work is right in front of our face. And the only person who really sees it clearly is Mary. And that's why we have this wonderful moment of Jesus being anointed at this dinner. Now, the pound of nard is pretty expensive, around $60,000 today, maybe $65,000. I mean, it's basically a year's worth of wages. And it's interesting that Jesus' ministry was corrupted by greed. If you've ever been in a church that had an embezzlement, Jesus' ministry had embezzlement too. Jesus' own people were stealing money from the ministry. So not very encouraging for the Christian church to say that the founder of our religion even had an embezzlement. Because this is another distraction where people are putting their desires in front of God's desires. This is why Lent is such an important time in the church's life, is because it's a time for you to really take stock of your life and to say, what am I putting in front of God? What is it that I love more than God? When we were in Hiroshima, we were meeting with an atomic bomb survivor, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that on Wednesday. And we were just talking about the radiation and the effects of radiation that endured for decades after the bomb. And it made me think about how sin has that sort of radioactive effect. There are many times where something happened to you or you did something, but it has an effect on you for years. You just go, why don't I trust people in relationships? Why do I always sabotage the people I'm married to? Those kinds of things. And then you find out, well, this happened to me when I was a child, and I've never, the radiation of the sin continues to affect the body and affect the life in different ways. And part of the work of repentance is dealing with and mitigating the effects of the radioactivity of sin, the poison of sin that remains long after the initial detonation of the event. And so this work of Lent has been so important because, unlike Judas, who's going to be focusing on grafting from the ministry of Jesus, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I love more than God? And do I use my religion to actually serve this sinful desire? Because what does Judas do? He offers a plausible excuse. I mean, who's going to say being financially responsible isn't a good value? When he says, well, really, is this how we should be using our money? And he's using that as a cover. And so this is where religious people during the season of Lent really have to consider whether we use our religion to cover up what we're doing, rather than bringing it before God, having it be exposed before God, dealing with the radiological fallout of our sin, and realizing there's healing, realizing there's forgiveness, realizing there is true mercy that is transformative. But we have to kind of lay ourselves down before the feet of Jesus. And the only person who isn't distracted, and a person who's not caught up in her own desires and being driven by those desires, is Mary. And you have to really read John 12 and John 13 together, because John 13 is the washing of the feet. And you'll remember when Jesus sets up the seating chart of the Last Supper, nobody wants the place of dealing with the feet. But Mary, he doesn't have to tell her. She lowers herself and pours herself out. She literally drops 60 grand on the feet of Jesus. And it's not even the money that matters. It's the pouring out of love. God, I have the most valuable thing. What she has is very valuable, and I will pour it out at your feet. And she doesn't do it in a kind of an aseptic way, the application of medicine, going, well, we're just going to do this. She does it with great love. She takes something of great value and applies it with great love. And when we think about the mission work of the church, when we think about doing culture, education, and service, we have to do it with love and do it with great love. Otherwise, it's just the deploying of resources the way everyone else deploys. Someone said this is the difference between, say, going to church and going to the DMV. The DMV will not love you. I don't know if you've ever felt loved at the DMV. They don't love you. They don't care because they're just there to apply a service. But if that service is applied with love, then there's a different character to it. So like this 84-year-old woman that we're going to stay in relationship with, we say, well, this isn't where we wanted this to go, but it doesn't mean we're going to stop loving you. It means we're just going to have to relate differently as we find what it is that God's calling is. And so look at Mary today washing the feet of Jesus with her own hair. She's going to kind of intermingle this gift of love to Jesus, and it's going to be a mark on her own body. So when she leaves, she's going to smell like the love. And in fact, this smell is going to be even greater than the smell of Lazarus. God is going to come and bring a new aroma, and this new aroma is resurrection. And that was something that was very clearly shared at Fran's service yesterday, was this promise of resurrection, this promise of new life, this promise of being accompanied by God, having God show up for us, but also making sure that we show up for each other. The only person who understands what's really happening is Mary and Jesus, because then Jesus says, you've missed the point. She's preparing me for my hour. Now, the early church used to consider baptism like wrestling. And if you know the Greeks and the Romans, they used to wrestle naked, oiled up. And so at baptism, they would oil you up like a wrestler. Now if we oiled up people naked for, they'd go, oh my, what kind of church is that? Things change culturally. But we could put you in a singlet. We could put you in headgear, something like that. Because they wanted people to realize that if you're going to engage in this work, you're going to be wrestling with the world. You're going to be wrestling with evil. And what she's doing is, it's like a boxer preparing for a boxing match. She's preparing Jesus for his greatest struggle, which will be going to Jerusalem, being willing to take the cross, being willing to be violated by the people that he's serving with great love, and not to say, you know what, I'm not going to do this for you. And so Mary comes and with great love pours out a great gift so that she can be part of the story. She's not going to be the one that saves, God saves. But she's going to tie her life, tie her wealth, tie her love to this story. And this is really the whole point of Lent. The whole point of prayer, fasting, and works of mercy is to say we're not the ones who save. God saves, and God has saved through the cross. But we can take our wealth, we can take our love, and we can mingle it with the work of God so that we can be part of the story, so that the kingdom can come with us. Amen.